What's up, Likely Nation? Welcome back to another podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to remind you all that for the month of October, myself and a bunch of other people in the food industry are going to be running 40 miles to raise funds and awareness for World Central Kitchen, an organization that I've been so impressed with, so inspired by. They've been serving so many meals during the pandemic, and for COVID-19 relief alone, they served 40 million meals. So I wanted to raise funds, raise awareness, and do my yearly run that I do with this brand. So if you'd like to join me, email me at linecookthoughts@outlook.com or send me a DM on Instagram at linecookthoughts. And before we get into the episode today, I also did want to mention that we actually dropped merchandise today. If you can go to linecookthoughts.com and you can check out the shop, we have shirts, Line Cook Nation shirt right here, repping the shirt, you can see it right there, and also baseball hats. So if you want to, rep the brand, represent what we're about, making a better industry for people, talking about issues like mental health, just being more aware of what workers go through in the food service industry. You want to represent that brand, go check it out. It's Line Cook Nation merchandise. Very excited to have it up. And yeah, just very grateful for everyone. So grateful for the support over everything I do. And yeah, just wanted to have some merchandise to maybe help raise more awareness for the brand. So go check it out at linecookthoughts.com. All right, link is also in the notes below. My guest today is Hanna Raskin. Hanna Raskin is the editor and publisher of the Food Section, a newsletter covering food and drink in the American South. She previously served as food editor and chief critic for the Post and Courier in Charleston, South Carolina. Her work has been recognized multiple times by the James Beard Foundation, which in 2017 awarded her its first local impact journalism prize. And for today's interview, you might be wondering, well, where is Hanna? Where is she exactly? And Hanna is a food critic, and so to be a food critic, she tries to remain anonymous as much as possible. So actually, you'll only see me, myself, the entire interview. You'll be able to hear Hanna, obviously, that's why I'm putting this up, but you'll only see video of me because we don't actually have video of Hanna because, like I said, she's trying to stay anonymous for doing food reviews. Now, for the interview, it's very interesting for me. We talk about how she actually became a food critic, and we get right into her process. How many people she goes out to eat with, what she orders, how many times she visits a restaurant. After that, we talk about Yelp, the good, the bad, the ugly. We go into Yelp on how obviously it can be a pain in the ass for anyone in the industry, but also it could have some positive aspects for the food industry if used correctly. And I really enjoyed that conversation with her. We then get into what it means to be a food critic during the COVID-19 pandemic. And some of you might not agree with Hanna in terms of how she's going to move forward in reviews, in terms of what she is going to look at with restaurants or how she's going to kind of rate them. But I do think it's interesting. I do think it's important that we do know how people in food are reviewing our restaurants and that we know just what critics look for and what they are doing. And that way we can make that judgment call like, well, like, what is this critic saying? What are they talking about? What are they looking into? So I think it's super important. I was very appreciative of Hanna coming on and giving me so much information and just being so transparent and honest. And I just wanted to thank her for that. And then finally, we talk about her new venture, which is the food section. It's actually already launched. I'm going to put a link in the notes for you to subscribe if you'd like to. It's basically going to be this project of hers where she's going to take this impact journalism into the restaurant industry. I asked her in the interview, is it ever possible if we could ever rate restaurants based on how they treat their employees, their staff? If a restaurant's doing really good and they're retaining staff and they're treating their employees fairly and there's equity in the restaurant and there's equality and there's just a great environment for people to learn in, why don't we award people based on that? So a lot of great information in this podcast. I really enjoyed checking in with Hanna, asking her a bunch of questions, and just was very appreciative for her coming on the show. So thank you all so much for watching. Also, I do want to point out, I'm drinking a Gatorade in the episode. During this interview, I was actually just getting over COVID. I had COVID about 2 weeks ago, and I had a mild case. I'm vaccinated. I had a breakthrough case, and so I do sound a little nasally, and I was drinking throughout the Gatorade throughout the show to because my throat kept getting dry. But I do apologize for that. Do apologize if I sound a little nasally. Like I said, I was getting over COVID. So, but yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another week's episode. And yeah, just thanks for the support. Over on the Instagram, we just hit 13,000 followers. It's been a really cool ride so far. It's almost 3 years I've been doing this. And so, yeah, just thank you for the support. Thank you for believing in this podcast. And thank you so much for Hanna to come on the show. And feel free to go check out the food section. I'm going to leave links in the bio, in the show notes of this episode on how you can subscribe to that, how you can, find Hanna on social media and go check it out. Thank you all so much. And here we go. Well, Hanna, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
If you just want to start by introducing yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. My name's Hanna Raskin. I'm a food writer based in Charleston, South Carolina. I was until recently the food editor at the newspaper here, the Post and Courier, and am now starting a new newsletter, the Food Section.
Awesome. Well, definitely a lot of questions about all of that throughout the interview. But first, I want to start out, it's just kind of a question of like, how does one become a food critic?
So there isn't any one way. I'm sure probably someone has Googled that very question and has found that there's not like a program for it, at least not yet. And which is great because everyone brings different backgrounds to the job. What is true almost across the board is you become a food critic by being a writer. You don't become a food critic by being a chef.
Okay.
Chefs tend to be like the worst food critics because the way they look at food is so different from the way a diner looks at food. They're, they appreciate different things, which is awesome. So, could very well, with a chef background, be a great food critic for other chefs, but it tends not to translate to a general audience as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that totally makes sense. I could also see
Yeah,
if like a chef is a food critic. I mean, I don't know. I feel like when I go out to eat, even if something's wrong, I kind of let things slide because I have also been in the back of house. So
absolutely. Right. It's really hard. I mean, that's kind of where your allegiance lies. And I don't mean to say that there aren't exceptions to this rule. There definitely have been food critics who, worked in kitchens for a while. And I would say that almost every critic has worked in a restaurant at some point.
okay.
But the idea that like, you made your name as a chef for a decade and then you become a food critic, that like almost never happens.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. Would love to hear kind of what got you interested in food. Well, first off, like where you're from and kind of what like when you first started to have an interest in food.
Yeah, I mean, I've had an interest in food my whole life, like I think most people. When I was 8 or 9 or 10, somewhere in there, I asked for my birthday party to be a chocolate chip cookie tasting party. Like the idea was to like rate cookies. So I was
Nice.
clearly already on the path of figuring out which foods were good. Additionally, at that little tasting party, which was based on the whole, like, it was like a Consumer Reports idea.
Yeah.
At the time, they had like a kids' Consumer Reports where they would, try and compare different things. I was like, oh, this is great. We're going to need a lot of cookies. And asked my mother to submit her cookies. And we did not rate them well, which I feel like is great training for a critic. If you can tell your own mother that her food's not good, you can pretty much tell anyone.
Yeah, I
So
guess so.
I always had interest in food, and partly because of that, because my mother wasn't, I mean, she just didn't care a lot about cooking because she was working outside the home, which was awesome and also an inspiration. But I was interested in food because I didn't get great food at home. My father wasn't really a cook either. So I think that's what my interest dates back to. Just kind of fascinated by just the varieties and the quality of food, and restaurants in particular, dating back as long as I can remember. So that's
Awesome.
how it
Yeah.
started.
No, I mean that totally makes sense. And doing this show for a while, I feel like there's like three different sets of like origin stories. There's like the people who grew up like making pasta with their grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's people like me who had like a good like my parents like cooked good, but it was like the traditional American food. And then there's people like yourself where like it wasn't like you felt like you were missing something in food, or like you knew
Right,
there was to be better. So I always find that interesting.
for
Um,
sure.
and so like you said obviously it said earlier being a food critic, you start out kind of as a writer. So is that kind of how you found your way into being a critic? It was like food writing or
Yeah. So I went into newspapers right out of college, which probably wasn't like the best track to take because it was a time like the economy was awesome. It was the late 90s. I could have done anything. And I went to work at a little newspaper in Mississippi making, I think, $16,000 a year. Like it was,
well,
even then, it wasn't good money. Even
okay.
then. So actually, while I was a reporter in Mississippi, I also waitressed at a Chinese restaurant. So it's not uncommon for journalists to have second jobs. So
Okay.
I worked at the college newspaper, so it was a skill I had. So yeah, went to become a reporter, and at that point wasn't writing about food at all. I was covering 3 rural counties. And stuck with newspapers for a couple of years. I went from Mississippi to Tucson, Arizona, and I was at the Daily there. So just like a really standard journalism background, covering cops, covering county government, like just kind of the training that all journalists go through. So I did that, and I got kind of disillusioned with it just because I was in my early 20s and I had, visions. And at the time, I was really concerned that like you put all this work into something and it didn't last. This was before people really used the internet on a regular basis. So it's like,
Mhm.
once you wrote something, it was gone. So I decided to go to museum school. The idea being I would stick with storytelling, but I could hang everything on the wall and they wouldn't take it down for a year, which seemed like better than newspapers.
Yeah.
But it turns out that's really museum school is something entirely different, and it's all about taking very good care of objects, and which is fantastic, but it wasn't my thing.
Okay.
But while I was there, it was a double program, it was a master's degree both in museum studies and in American history, which I made more of my focus, and ended up writing my graduate thesis on the relationship between Jews and Chinese food,
Okay.
which now is like that's commonly understood. Like it's been done to death at this point, but at the time, again, this is like pre-internet era. There was no writing about it, and so choosing a food history topic meant that I got to know a lot of folks who were thinking about food and writing about food pretty early on. So, like I said, I wasn't really into the museum thing, so I ended up after school moving to Asheville, North Carolina to lead mountain bike trips.
Okay.
So I was down there. And so I was living in Asheville, living a pretty, typical Asheville life. Also, back in restaurants, waitressing again,
Yeah.
and leading the mountain bike trips. And the Alt Weekly needed a food writer. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I've got the academic background. I keep working in restaurants, and I know how to work in a newspaper. So that's how I got started.
Nice. Awesome. No, that's interesting. I actually just went down to North Carolina for the first time this past month. Went
Oh,
down to
awesome. Where'd you
Charlotte.
go?
Yeah, Charlotte.
Cool.
Yeah, it was cool. My friend Indira works down there. Um, and we went to the Waterman restaurant is where she works. It was awesome, and just got to hang out around Charlotte. We went to this like it was like this whitewater rafting center over in Charlotte. It was
Yeah.
fun. It was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was nice to kind of get away for a little bit.
Yeah, Charlotte's a cool town. It certainly doesn't have that reputation. It's a banking center and it's seen like it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of staid and, business focused, but there's a lot of neat stuff going on there and really a lot of good food to eat.
Yeah, no, it was. We went. I forget the name of the restaurant. We went for brunch to this one place, and it was awesome. And it was like it was just such good food and so well done. So, yeah, no, Charlotte was cool. Yeah, so thanks obviously for sharing that. Kind of how you got into food, and obviously you've been a critic for a good amount of time. And so, just a couple, I guess, just to start out, like what, I mean, besides the obvious, how hard has it been to, I guess, be anonymous, or why is that important? Because obviously there's some food critics that you kind of know who they are. I'm sure there's a picture of you somewhere, but why
Yeah.
is anonymity, which is a difficult word to say apparently, so important in the world of
Yeah.
food criticism?
Hard to say, harder to do. So the deal with anonymity is like I am not truly anonymous. Like I leave the house, right? And so there are not only pictures of me, posted in restaurant kitchens, which is classic, but like
Hmm.
you could Google me and there is a picture. I mean, it's really old at this point, but I mean, there are enough out there that like when I'm meeting someone, I can tell them to Google the picture. I know it's out there as much as I've tried to keep that from happening. Like I said, it's like 20 years out of date, but still there.
Okay.
Um, but that's, I don't mean that folks should go Google it necessarily, but that's the reality. And also the reality is that Charleston, where I live, is an incredibly small town. And of course, people here know who I am, what I look like, absolutely. Partly too, part of serving my readers is like going out and talking to them rather than, as I said, just staying home. Like
Yeah.
I go talk to the Rotary Club, I go talk to the Kiwanis, like I'm out there. But what I don't do is post my picture. And I ask that people not take my picture or, put it on social media or anything. And the reason why, I mean, part of it, yes, is that it's really helpful in other markets, not in Charleston, to be able to not be made when you walk in the door.
Hmm.
But even more than that, it just strikes me as really unseemly to put your picture up. Like, because to me, it says, like, know who I am, know what I look like, and treat me, in a special way when you see me. So that's why I do it. It's really just a matter of I don't want to go so far as to say humility, but I just think it's good practice to not broadcast photos.
And obviously, like you have, the rules to, no photos. I mean, to be transparent, when I, emailed you about the show, I was like, all right, we're gonna do a Skype interview, and I didn't even like occur to me that you couldn't be on video.
Yeah,
So
I really try to avoid video whenever I can. Like I said, I mean, you don't need to be a great researcher to find what I look like, but just trying any way I can make it a little bit harder so that when people do look up my name, it's not the first thing that comes up.
yeah, no, I mean, it definitely makes sense, and like the whole theory or reason by why you do it makes it seem like a more fair process. Like like do you have you ever, so I guess like when you go to out to a restaurant, obviously you critique different restaurants, and kind of just want to get a sense of what that process is like. I think of the idea of, let's say, like Michelin stars, for example. Like there's a certain restaurant that fits into the Michelin category, and obviously, we've seen them kind of expand into some other things. But how do you go to like a fine dining restaurant as opposed to maybe a restaurant that isn't fine dining? Like, do you group them into like sectors of restaurants, or kind of what's your process when approaching a restaurant so you're not? I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I
No,
feel like
of course it makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah, I think so. Restaurants vary tremendously, as you say. I mean, not just in price point and cuisine, but like there's many restaurants as there are people who own and work in restaurants, right? So they're
hmm
all very individualized. But I think the process of reviewing and how you approach the restaurant doesn't have to be customized from one restaurant to another. I think it can be pretty standard, which is when I go into a restaurant, whether it's like a banh mi shop or the Michelin star competitor that you're talking about. My question is, what are they trying to do here, and how well are they doing it?
okay,
So, like I'm not gonna fault the fine dining restaurant because they don't have a great banh mi on the menu. That would be really weird.
yeah,
Just like it would be strange to look at it the other way around. So and that pretty much works. Like you can figure out what are they trying to do, and also why are they trying to do it. Is certainly part of the critical process. Like you can tell if you walk into a restaurant and they're just there clearly to make a ton of money. You can tell, like, and
hmm
so if they're there to like celebrate their culture, you can tell. Like those things are all part of it, and there's not any right or wrong answer necessarily, but I think that does factor into a review, regardless of what kind of restaurant it is.
okay. And when you're actually in the review process, are you going out by yourself, or are you going out with a party?
Yeah, so I go at least 2 times, typically three, because as we know, there's no way to evaluate a restaurant based on one experience. It can be all over the map. So usually I'm going 3 times, and of those 3 times, I usually so 2 of the 3 times I go with other people
Okay,
because I think that's how most people go to restaurants.
yeah,
And I think that's how they're meant to be experienced. Additionally, I got to eat all of it. So it's like you can only order so much food before
hmm
people are like, why are you eating all this food by yourself?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, so I go with other people. I don't ever go, almost never would I go with more than 3 other people because at that point now you're just throwing a party, you're not working. So
yeah.
um, and then on the third, not a third or one of the 3 visits, I do go by myself because that way I can just watch and observe, and I don't have to worry about like keeping up with the conversation or being a good
hmm
dinner date. Yeah, so I think both are valid and valuable.
And are you going like? I mean, because obviously, as someone who's worked in kitchens, I don't work in. I've left restaurants when COVID hit, to see what else is in the industry. But working in kitchens, like Saturday night service seems to be like the worst. Would probably be like the worst time to have someone walk in. Do you often go during busy times? Do you space out, or is that not really a factor?
Yeah, I space it out. I mean, this is pre-COVID. I'm just about to
hmm
start reviewing again, so it's been a while. But so what I was about to say is like, I typically just ignore lunch because I think restaurants do too. Like, I assume it's a good restaurant. Like, I'm only coming for dinner. I mean,
Yeah,
unless they're making a point, like we're a lunch place now. Obviously, with staffing, there is no more restaurant lunch. But
yeah.
then it was something I just sort of wrote off. So I come for dinner. and I try to come on different nights. So I will come on a Friday or Saturday night, because I think a lot of my readers will,
Of
So
course,
I
yeah.
need to know, like, how do they deal with it when they can't seat you for an hour? Like, how, whatever comes up, like, I do try and experience that, but I also do try and go on a quieter night, to give. I think one of the misconceptions about critics is that they're out there to be critical in the popular sense, like to criticize.
Hmm.
Really, we're trying to give, I mean, it's like I always ask a server, like, what should I order? Like, I want to see the restaurant at its best, right?
Yeah.
So we really try and give them a chance to shine. That doesn't mean, as I said, I would never call ahead or let folks know that I was there for a review visit, but I want to see the restaurant's best, in part because I've got to eat the food. Like, I don't want a terrible food. Like, nobody wants a bad review
Yeah.
isn't really fun. Remember, you're going again and again and again. It's like, oh, this is awful. So
Yeah.
so in terms of like setting up a restaurant for success, yeah, I'll show up on a Tuesday night.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like that's a good point. You'd want to go when most people are going. So I just know as like someone who's worked in kitchens, I remember we had someone come in in a kitchen I was working at before, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is like the craziest night ever. But it happens
Right.
that way. Um,
Yeah.
so you sit down to eat. So obviously, like the review starts as you walk in the door. How much is it, like 50-50 service to food, or is there like certain aspects where food would maybe take precedent over a poor service, or is it like how do you kind of weigh that in your review?
I mean, I think that goes back to what I was saying about what the restaurant is intending to do, right? I mean, there
Okay.
are some restaurants that just like lay on the hospitality so thick, like you don't even notice that the food isn't that good, and that's actually okay. Like you go just because you want, the owner to like come over to your table and sing. It's like, oh, this is so lovely. So yeah, so you kind of look at what the restaurant is and take it all together. There isn't a percentage breakdown, I don't think. I mean, I guess, gosh, yeah, I really couldn't break it down percentage wise because it really is about the whole experience.
Okay. And obviously, like you're so like, do you have? I guess you said you don't want to order too much because obviously you won't be able to eat it all. Is there a certain amount if you were to go to a restaurant that has let's say appetizers, entrees, and desserts? Is there a certain amount of apps you would order entrees, desserts if you were with like three different people, or is it more so everyone kind of getting their own thing and then obviously you sharing it all?
Yeah, obviously we share it all. I mean, usually the rule is, and I brief people before they come out with me, and I always tell people. I mean, I mentioned before, like talking to the Rotary Club, and the question's always like, "How do we get to go on a review with you?" And I always warn them, like, "You're not gonna like it. Like, you can come, like, give me your email address. I'll take anyone, but you're not gonna like it." Because I'm going to eat off your plate and I'm going to tell you what to order, and you can't ask for any substitutions. And if you're not happy, you can't complain to the server. Anyhow, point being, I also tell them you have to eat a lot. So the expectation, for myself and anyone I'm with would be every course, one appetizer, one entree, one salad if that's in there, one dessert. So, and maybe more apps depending like on their size. Like in a small plate place, you might end up with a little bit more, but yeah, you come expecting to eat. I will say maybe not dessert because, as we know, so few restaurants have pastry chefs these days, and it's like I don't really need your ice cream. Like I don't really care, but the rest of it, yeah.
Man, I mean, I know. I'm sure there's. Well, I'll get to that in a second. I guess like going through. I guess the review. So obviously you have the food. Are you taking notes at the like because you still want to kind of have that idea of, obviously them not knowing you're doing a review. So what is your process to account the meal or record the meal?
So the process now has changed. While I've been in this business, now it's to take pictures with my phone, which doesn't, nobody's suspicious about that at all. Everyone takes pictures of their food with their phone these days. So, and that's all I need. I mean, if I see the picture, so I take notes immediately after I leave the restaurant, and looking at the picture is really all I need to jog my memory. But when I started, couldn't do that. And so you used to go and like scribble notes in the bathroom. You'd always have to steal a menu because there was no other way to get it, So things
Yeah,
have definitely changed.
that's awesome. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. Um, yeah, and then obviously like you know so I feel like everyone like just I'm sure you hear this a lot. It's like, oh, I'd love to be a food critic. Um, just trying food all day and like giving reviews. But what is challenging about being a critic? What are some of the challenges you face in the profession?
Oh my God. It's so amazing to me how many people the idea of like getting free food, which it's not free from the restaurant, but when you have an employer like a newspaper, they pay for the meal. And it's amazing to me how many people are like so seduced by that when they are in fact doctors and lawyers. Like this makes no sense. You're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. As I told you, my starting salary was $16,000. Like can't believe you care that much that they cover your grilled cheese sandwich. Like, I don't get it. But yes, people are totally infatuated with the idea of restaurant criticism because I don't think I don't think it's necessarily apparent how much work goes into it, right? I think they
Hmm.
think that like you go eat a meal and then you just write what you think of it. So as we've already said, that's not the case. You go multiple times. There's a tremendous amount of coordination just to make the meals happen, to document the meals appropriately, then to fact check after. You don't just sit down and write. I mean, you've got to, call the restaurant, make sure all your facts are correct. Um, and writing is hard. I mean, it's really writing is a really hard job to be able to convey, your experience to people in a way that is respectful of their time, is respectful of the restaurants, of all the employees, all the workers who have, created this experience. So yeah, to be respectful and helpful, all that's really difficult. And then you have to deal with the blowback, which there always is. Like no one likes their reviews, not even when they're good.
Yeah.
So it's that part too.
That's so interesting because when I started in food, and people would ask me what I wanted to do. Obviously, like be a chef, own a restaurant. That's changed since I've started, but a lot of times people are like, "Well, you could always be a food critic." Like whenever I brought up writing, because I love to write, and I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know." Like, I mean, it seems like a very difficult job, and I guess that's kind of my next point is, you know, there's a good amount of people we hold in regard in food in terms of rating our food, giving valuing their opinion, making sure that you go to the restaurant, the reader trusts your opinion on food. How do you build that? Like, I feel like that is something that is very special if you're a food critic that people really trust in. How are you able to build that? I guess just respect between you and the person reading your reviews.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. It's hard. Like I think because as you say, it's incredibly important. So I think one of the most important things is to be consistent. As I always tell readers, like you don't have to agree with me. Like my opinion is really the least important part of a review. I'm trying to tell you like what kind of place it is and whether you'll like it. And it's fine by me if you read a review where I hated the place and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna love it. Like that's
Hmm.
great. So that comes again from consistency. Like people over time get to know like what I like honestly. Like there's no such thing. I mean like there's no objectivity in a review by definition. It's an opinion. So consistency is incredibly important. I mean, good reporting is important. People are going to know if you say like, well, I really enjoyed the turkey dish and it turns out the turkey was a chicken. People are like, well, if you got that wrong, you probably got a lot of other stuff wrong too. So I think being factual is incredibly important for building trust. And just communication. Like anyone who emails me, I email back, no matter how angry they are. I'm always happy to have a conversation, and I think that helps a lot too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think communication obviously is like very important, and yeah, I mean, I just think it's so cool that you're able to build this respect and build this kind of relationship with not only restaurants but also people who read your reviews.
Yeah.
Um, is it ever when you end up having a review that's poor, is it challenging at all to write that review, or is it more so just like a part of I mean, obviously it's a part of the job, but is it harder to write a negative review than maybe a positive one?
The hardest reviews to rate are the ones where the obviously whoever opened the restaurant just didn't care. Like I can
Yeah.
only put as much thought into my piece as they put into the restaurant, right? So if you go to a place and it's just like a couple burgers and like they're getting them from Cisco, it's like what am I going to say? Like there's just nothing went into it, so I can't get anything out of it. Those are the
Hmm.
hardest ones to write. Um, but negative review, guys, they're all really hard. You have to be really careful writing a positive review because you don't want to set up a situation where readers then think like it's the greatest place in the world, and then they get really upset when it's not perfect, and then they get on Yelp. Like you don't want to set that up, nor do you want to like overburden a brand new restaurant with more traffic than they need. Like that can be really difficult too. So they're all hard, I would say. But I will say, in terms of one thing I do, and I think most critics do this, if I am writing a negative review, like really negative, that people are going to know is negative, it's, even in a positive review, there's often like, you're going to find some flaws, but like
Yeah.
clearly a negative review is going to get attention. I almost always tell the restaurant beforehand. So they never read it, but I just think they need the time to, prepare their team for it, and just like mentally, I just try and give them a heads up, and I don't say what's in the review, but I just say, this is not the review you're expecting. So just want you to be ready.
What's the response like usually?
If they have a publicist, it's usually thank you. If they don't, sometimes I never hear. Sometimes I don't hear anything back. But they have the information. I think people are appreciative. They're really angry to get a negative review, but I think at least having a jump on it helps. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned. Well, first off, thank you for sharing your process, because that was like the biggest, like for me. I've always wondered how it kind of all worked, and I'm sure there's a lot more you know situations, or like nuanced things that happen. But obviously, there's other things I'd like to ask you. Um, but so first, thank you for that. But you brought up Yelp. I know you did some work back in 2013 trying to, or just offering advice to diners that are using Yelp. What are your thoughts on kind of, or what was it like, I guess, when Yelp came about? Like, did that worry you at all that diners had more of a say in like this criticism type style?
That's a really good question. I mean, I never felt threatened by Yelp. When it first came out, I don't know if, anyone realized how important it was going to be, but it seemed to me so different from what I was doing. I never considered it like a challenge in any way. It's like, because everything I've just described is not what a Yelper does. You don't go back multiple times anonymously and with none
Mm-hmm.
of that. But I do think, and this is why I wrote the book about how to use Yelp. Like, I think it could actually be a really good tool.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great for folks to reflect on what they ate. Like, I think that's good all around. It's good for the eater. It's good for the restaurant. Like, I would imagine most people who are, spending their lives in food and bev want people thinking hard about food. Now, as we know, that's not what most Yelpers do. Obviously, we've all read like the most ridiculous Yelp reviews, but
Mm-hmm.
that's why I wrote that book, because I was like, look, there's nothing wrong with the platform. I mean, there's a lot wrong with Yelp, and we know all those terrible things Yelp as a company has done. But the idea of sharing your, reflections on a meal, ain't nothing wrong with that. It's just how it's been used.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Yelp is, for people in restaurants, it's like notorious like this like negative thing, um, but yeah, like you said, like, and kind of looking into your work, there definitely is room for positivity, and I've seen good Yelp reviews. It's just like, it's just, I guess, I think what's important is educating like people who read that in general, like consumers in general, and be like, hey, like, just know like this isn't someone who is a professional, or it is someone that could like have had a really one-off experience, and they're like writing out of pure emotion, and it's just like it's very interesting.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, when I say the book, although it was directed at people who are writing reviews on Yelp, it's also for those who are reading reviews on Yelp, because you can often pull useful information out of those terrible reviews. I mean, I don't really care if you don't want cheese on your salad because that's what your stepfather always made you eat as a kid. Like, it's like, who cares about that? But they've just told you that they're putting, blue cheese on the Caesar salad. Okay, well, that's an interesting choice. So, I mean, there are facts in there. There are things you can use if you're a discerning reader, I suppose.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I totally agree. So, one, I guess, kind of one more thing. You brought up COVID. Obviously, that's like on top of mind for everyone. Um, thinking about reviews, you said you're going to be starting back reviews soon. Obviously, this is such a different time than before COVID started. Also, looking at like, I read last month Eater going away from starred reviews, or so. I guess just how is your review process changing due to the pandemic?
So it's interesting. I mean, when I stopped doing reviews right at the start, and I never did any reviews throughout the pandemic, which was different than my colleagues in other places, because we never closed on-premise dining. I mean, it was closed for 2 weeks. So when I say this to people on the coast who had a very different situation, I have to stress it was May 2020 that we were back to normal, not May 2021, May 2020. South Carolina got everyone back in the restaurants for Mother's Day, no capacity restrictions, no nothing, no nothing.
Okay.
So we were back to so-called normal the whole time. So for that reason, I never reviewed takeout because there were no takeout exclusive operations. So if I were to say like you can get a great plate of pasta at this place, people were going to go to that place and eat it within 3 feet of someone else, and it's a public safety hazard. So I
Yeah.
stopped reviewing, right? So, but I I don't agree that we now need to like take it easy on restaurants. To be honest, I think as concerned as I am about people in the industry, and God, I mean, we all know what a horrible, horrible year, more than a year, this whole experience has been. Like,
Yeah.
I get it, but I also feel like the poor healthcare worker who's had at least as bad of a year deserves to be treated well when she goes out to dinner. Like, if you're, we've seen a lot of restaurant owners who, they're making do with fewer staff, and I understand why. They're not paying enough, so they don't have enough people. And if guests have to deal with, the consequences of that, they should know.
Yeah.
They should know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, and kind of no, like what you said before, how you're not going out to negatively critique, you're going out to share the experience, and I think that that is important. So yeah, I mean, I just find that interesting, and then with the rating system, I think it's also interesting to definitely like keep that because, like you said, like you probably know, like it's like this divisive thing where whether or not people should actually be rating at all. So,
Right.
yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Do you think that like what do you think the response would be to reviews for the like now going not I don't want to say post pandemic but now that you're going to be starting up again?
We'll find out.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, yeah, we'll find out. I do think I should say that the pandemic figures into it. Like, as you say, like we're not out of it, and I would want restaurants to be cognizant of that in some way. And I don't mean those stupid QR codes instead of menus. I mean, I feel like, I do think it's still important to like, create more space for people, probably
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Like, point of this is that keeping your guests safe to me is like the utmost hospitality, and I would expect to see that. So I guess what I'm saying is the conditions we are in will figure into my reviews in some way.
Okay.
So I'm not saying like I'm gonna have a separate star column for it or anything, but I think just knowing that a restaurant is cognizant of the current circumstances, whether it be, I mean, we've had a lot happen in the world over the last year or two, but,
Yeah.
I do ask myself like that, like, what are they doing on the environmental front? What are they doing on the public safety front? Like, I think that matters.
I guess this has been this is a question, the huge question I wanted to ask a food critic like yourself is
Yeah.
for people in the back of house or people in the food industry for a long time, you only obviously are able to critique what you see in the
Right.
dining room getting food, but there are a lot of people in the industry that would like also have to have some of that critique be on how a restaurant operates, how
Yep.
how equity in the restaurant, how their staff is treated, safety concerns of staff. Is that ever I mean, how could you ever fit that into a review if you're only not saying that like that is a failing of any. I'm just like genuinely curious if there's any ideas on how to rate a restaurant on
Yeah.
that.
I mean, I think the answer is no, unfortunately, because
Yeah.
what people may not always realize or think through is how much reporting it requires to put, to report on allegations like that. And we've all seen this happen with a lot of big names. We know how long those stories took to come together, right? Like, I think what Seattle Times said, it was like 2 years on the Eduardo Jordan story. Like,
Yeah.
that's how long it takes. If you're going to acknowledge and most importantly print allegations of a really serious nature takes years, and people don't want to wait years for a review. Like it serves a different purpose. So the only answer to this, and I feel like you kind of gave me a softball here on my new enterprise, which is the only answer for this is
that was my next question.
More and better food journalism, right? So that has to exist kind of side by side with the reviews. As I said, my approach to reviewing is very reportorial. Like I use journalistic tactics in how I do my reviews, but it's not a substitute for true investigative reporting. And that needs to happen in the food world a lot more. So right now, this newsletter that I'm starting, it's just me. Like I can't, do all the reasons, do all the investigation. It needs to happen. But the idea of this newsletter is to try and invigorate, rigorous food journalism across the South, which has too long lacked it in too many places.
And this is going to be the food section. It's going to be available on Substack.
You got it. Foodsection.substack.com.
Awesome. And so, I mean, you kind of gave a little, introduction to it there, but what can you walk me through, like, what made you want to start this, do this? Like, what's the origin story for the food section?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I'm doing it is because I feel like I was fairly successful doing what I do in Charleston. And it really pained me, especially during the pandemic, how many people called me, and you just alluded to this in your last question, employees were so scared. As I said, South Carolina was not a safe space for anyone, and it sure was not for restaurant workers. And they were so scared about the conditions they were in. They were so scared by dishwashers dying. Like they should be scared. They should have been scared. And so they called me, and I reported on it. And so it occurred to me how many people are in places like, you can name a zillion little towns where they were put in the same situation and they had no one to appeal to. And that to me was the most important thing. I mean, I think for the welfare of restaurant workers, for the good of the dining public, I think we need more food journalism in more places. So that's why I'm doing this.
Will this be like a weekly? Because I follow a couple of Substack users. Is this like a weekly newsletter?
So what they keep telling me in Substack is like things change, which is I was like, no, I want to get this right. So we'll see. But where it's going to begin is we'll have come out on Mondays and Wednesdays. Okay. Monday being like a bigger centerpiece, which could be a review. My idea is to run reviews. I think they'll be running every like 5 or 6 weeks. I'll have a review, but it will alternate with features, with investigative pieces, whatever. Like that's the longer read comes out Monday. Okay. And then Wednesdays will be a collection of kind of columns, shorter news briefs, kind of the quicker hits sort of thing.
And are you going to be reviewing exclusively through Substack?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. So it's kind of just like your own now food,
section.
Media. Yeah, section. Yeah.
It's my own food section. I mean, again, I was basically like running everything on my own at the newspaper, so it's just moving that along, doing it for a wider coverage area, and I'm running the show. So yeah.
Awesome. And I guess where can people go and subscribe? Or I mean, I know it's not released yet, but they can sign up for it, correct?
Yeah, I would love for them to sign up for it. And it's the launch date is September 15th. So depending on when this airs, it may be, by the time folks hear this.
This will be out the 16th. So yeah.
Great timing. Okay. So so all people have to do is go to the foodsection.substack.com.
Perfect.
And also if they find any of my social media, like I've got it all over there too. So
I was going to ask you next, anywhere else you'd like people to like look for your work? Follow you on social media?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram. It's my name. So Hanna Raskin, no H. There's a Hanna Raskin in California who has an H at the end of her name. And poor Hanna Raskin gets my hate mail sometimes. And I've never met her, but we've emailed, and she's a lovely aerobics instructor. She doesn't understand why people are so angry. So
yeah. I mean, hey, maybe you just slip with the H in there sometimes, and it can relieve some pressure.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, obviously anyone listening, go, subscribe to the newsletter. I know I will be. And just very excited. I end all my interviews the same way. I've been doing this for like almost 3 years now, and this community of people that listen to the podcast, follow the work. I call them the Line Cook Nation. That's where I started as a line cook. But really, it's just a group of chefs, front of house people, people in the food industry who love to just learn and grow and connect with each other. So now that you're on the show, what does it mean for you to be, talking to this group of people?
Oh, I mean, it's a privilege. It's really a privilege. It's not, a group of people I get to talk to enough. I can't get enough of, folks who are working and who are, doing this hard work every day. So, and I really want to emphasize, like, if people want to get in touch with me, I am so good at correspondence. I love to hear from people. So often you hear people like, well, why don't you see this, or why don't you ever hear about that? Tell me about it. I'd love to have the conversation. I am open to any direct message, my email's all over. I mean, get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and yeah, it was just a
Yeah.
pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much for taking the time. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. Like always, if you want to leave a review, or you want to subscribe, or you want to hit the like button, please do so on YouTube. I always love hearing feedback, so drop it in the comments. Also, if you want to run in October to raise funds and awareness for World Central Kitchen, DM me on Instagram at linecookthoughts or email me at linecookthoughts@outlook.com. Check out the merchandise, the Line Cook Nation merchandise at linecookthoughts.com. And thank you all so much once again for tuning into the episode. Thank you to Hannah. Go check out the food section. I'll see you on the next podcast.